Well, 50 years ago, do you think you'd be here?
Never. But here we are. It's great to be here.
It really has been an amazing journey in both of our lifetimes. But I just want to bring us back for a moment to something in the recent past. So in August of 2016, we gathered in New Orleans for the churchwide assembly, and at that we presented to the assembly Declaration on the Way to Unity, and we were wondering how this was going to be received by all of us. And so you were there for the hearings. What did you happen to see when the folks came up? We had to have hearings before we could vote. We were nervous about this.
We were a little bit nervous. We thought that really that it would be passed. We weren't sure how much we would get it passed by. And before the vote was taken, we had a number of hearings, and this was a time for people to ask questions and to raise any concerns that they had. And we were already there. We had the theologians from the Lutheran side and the Catholic side there to answer the theological concerns of others. And as a matter of fact, there were hardly any questions, some clarification questions. But what we found was that it provided people with a time to give testimony. And people gave testimony about where they were. And one of the things we heard over and over again, as we hear so often, is the longing for full communion, the longing to share at the table. And this was something that really was very moving. I mean, I think that even in the statements coming out of Lund, and the statement came out today, ending this year of commemoration, the Catholics and the Lutherans still see this as something that we have to continue to work towards, continue dialoguing with each other. And this is so, so important. But it was very moving to hear people give witness and to talk about how thirsty they were for the Eucharist, for sharing the Eucharist together, and how much everyone wanted to be together.
It was a remarkable experience. Khadija Islam, one of our co-hosts this morning, was one who gave a very impassioned testimony because her godchild is Catholic. And being young and I think prophetic and a little impatient, she really wants us to get our act together. So thank you for that. It's interesting that this year's commemoration began in October 31st, 2016 in Lund, Sweden, at the cathedral there. And Lund is the place where the Lutheran World Federation first came into being just after the Second World War. And so we were gathered there at a service jointly sponsored and led by the Vatican and the Lutheran World Federation. And in that, in the statement that they produced, both the Pope and also Bishop Munib Yunan of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land signed a statement which was also repeated today, saying it was so wonderful that, in fact, people can share in their families the most intimate parts of all of their lives. But if they're not Lutheran families or Catholic families, but blended families, they cannot come together at the Lord's table. And so we said on the Lutheran World Federation side and on the Vatican side that this is a pastoral concern and a pastoral issue that demands some kind of urgency from us. So I think that was wonderful. And you worked on these dialogues for all these years.
We did. And it was just wonderful to see have this meeting. I think the vote ended up being something like over 99% of the 1,000 delegates voted for acceptance.
And we never agree on things.
So that was wonderful. And on the Catholic side, the Ecumenical Committee for Ecumenism and Interreligious Affairs, the whole committee unanimously accepted the document. So it was really something that was very, very moving. Cardinal Koch, who in many ways was inspirational with setting forth to work on this project, said that we have to develop a new genre of writing. He called the genre on the way. In other words, there's so much more that unites us than divides us. So we should write in that manner. We should live in that manner. And I think that was borne out by this wonderful, wonderful gathering that we had. For me, it was a very moving experience because at this gathering, Elizabeth had presented me with this beautiful porcelain chalice and plate and a little picture for the wine. And it was just, we looked forward to the day when we could share together. So when I held that up, the people went wild. It was a very moving experience for that. And I have that to this day on my desk. So every time someone comes in my office, they ask, well, what is that? Well, I'll tell you. And they hear the story. But that was very, very moving. And it really is a sign of things to come by God's grace. We know that that day will come because we know the prayer of Jesus will be heard. And so we just have to not get in the way of it. And we have to do everything that we can to hasten that day. People are really, really hungry for the Eucharist together and for this sharing together. There's so much about sharing. You know, I was thinking about the singing before we began this morning's program. And, you know, we harmonize with each other oftentimes in our singing. And we show that we are really alike. And we are in harmony with each other. So I think worshiping together and singing together, praying together, this shows that we are together. We don't have that full communion yet, but we definitely are on the way.
A lot of this got started 50 years ago with the Second Vatican Council, at least for your side, and gave us a lot of hope and encouragement. And so we have brought together in the document, Declaration on the Way, 50 years of not only U.S. Lutheran and Roman Catholic dialogue, but international Lutheran and Roman Catholic dialogue. And in that book, dealing with issues about ministry, the Eucharist, and also about the church, ecclesiology, we find that we have now 32 significant areas that are no longer church dividing for us. 32. And we have 15 more we have to work on, and some of them are pretty big, but and so now we've decided that we're not going to go back and keep rehashing this, but we're going to start from the point that there's more that we have that unites us than separates us. Oh, this was before he had his rotator cuff surgery done, so I know you had that picture.
I think it's a great picture.
So on these very important issues of how we understand ourselves as churches together, as people of God in the world, we have complete agreement on these issues. Now, some are to be looked at, and that is continuing now. I think the Finnish church, the Lutherans, and then the Roman Catholic Church in Finland, they have just recently issued a declaration about how they're coming into greater understanding with one another. And today, we're very happy to hear, so shout out to our Anglican friends, that in fact the Church of England is receiving is encouraged by the message of the joint declaration and the doctrine of justification, and that's happening right now in Westminster Abbey. So Martin Jung is there, otherwise he would be here with us today. Now, I think one of the things that's been significant and helpful is that we do not minimize those things that are still difficult issues between us. And that's why we were able to come to some agreement. So in the 15 remaining, of course it has to do with how we understand ministry. You're not quite there yet, but you're not ordaining women.
Not yet.
Not yet. Not yet. And we're not quite there yet. We have not come to a decision about how we recognize the role of the Bishop of Rome, of the Pope for the whole church.
Right. That's right.
But we're not shying away from these difficult conversations.
I think that's a very important point in the sense, and that also emphasizes the need for continuing dialogue. In the sense that there are difficult questions that we have. Pope Francis says time and time again, he said that with regard to the Evangelical Lutheran dialogue, he said it with regard also to the Anglican dialogue, that there are issues that might seem at times to us impossible. He talked about our differences with regard to sexuality, with marriages, and with regard to ordination of women and so on. And he said that, we right now don't know what are the answers, what are the responses, the final responses to these things. But who can limit the grace of God? And who can limit the enlightenment of God or the movement of God in these things? And it's in that spirit that we move forward. I think also one of the things that has been so obvious to us, especially I think with the Evangelical Lutheran dialogue especially, is that there is a dialogue that is able to move forward because of the relationships that we have with each other. It is a genuine relationships. I mean, we like each other. We like to pray together. We like to spend time together. We miss each other. It's something very genuine. It reminds me when I was a student at Columbia University in New York, I had a wonderful professor, Philip Phoenix, and he taught a course on ways of knowing. He said, if you really want to know anything, that you have to open yourself up to that particular thing, whether it's religion, mathematics, history, theology, whatever it is. You open yourself entirely to that. And you apprentice yourself to people who live that in their everyday life. And then, the most important thing is, you must have a reverence for the person and the person's beliefs. And he says, if you don't have a reverence, you might not believe it yourself, but if you don't have a reverence for the other person's belief, then you will not have a real dialogue. And I've always thought of that. And he says, if you really are interested in knowing someone, you must have that spirit of reverence. He used that word. In fact, in the eulogy when he passed on to the Lord not too long ago, they called him the professor of reverence. And he taught us that. When I was in Columbia, this is ancient history, but those were the days, when the universities were being taken over. The president's office was taken over. The one class that did not stop during those weeks was Ways of Knowing. We dared not miss that class. So I think this is something that is with us. We have this joyful relationship with each other, and we respect and we have a reverence for each other.
I think that's our hope in our work as the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, not only with ecumenical relationships, but interreligious, that we're going to move beyond tolerance. Tolerance basically means I'll go along until you get the truth and come over to my side. And we want to move beyond that to this sense of reverence and understanding that God's mercy and grace is too wide and God is too great for us to know everything about God. So how, being true to our own understanding of God, we're not going into the kumbaya mushiness that we could do sometimes, but being true to that, listen intently to the beliefs and the understandings of God that others have. So that's an important thing that we're doing.
It is. It's very, very important, I believe. And that's, as Elizabeth said, it requires hard work. But I think that when we began to work on this Declaration on the Way, one of the reasons we thought it was appropriate to do this work, because we felt a confidence in each other. We felt we were up to the task, that we could face hard issues. And we could say that, yes, we agree on these things, we don't agree on those things. And we could do that. We had the reserve and the willpower to do that without casting things aside. It was not an all or nothing thing. We have a communion, we have a union. It might not be perfect, but it's real. And that's something that we can't forget. And with that in mind, we can move forward. I think if you think about prior to the Second Vatican Council, how we spoke about each other, it was terrible. Oh my Lord! And then it was something. Then the Vatican Council came about 50 years ago, and there was an article written not too long ago. It was written 50 years ago, and it was republished again in America Magazine 50 years after. And you look at how we've changed over these last 50 years. It's really been a fast forward. There was an interesting part of the article I always got a chuckle out of, and the author said that during the Second Vatican Council, as the church fathers were entering for the deliberations and so on, entering into the Vatican, that there was a person out there with holding up a big picture of Martin Luther, and underneath it said, "In your heart, you know he's right." So
I think sometimes people have sort of seen these ecumenical dialogues as something done by academics in closed doors and not really that relevant to the people, the rank and file in the pew, though we saw at the hearings and the reception at our church-wide assembly that this is very practical, very personal, very immediate. But another step that we took when we were in Lund is that we signed a document together, the Lutheran World Federation, with Caritas, which is the Roman Catholic International Relief Organization, saying we're going to work together. Because if people are starving, they really don't care if it's Catholic rice or Lutheran rice. And if people need shelter, especially now when we are seeing more displaced people, more migrants, more refugees than any time since the Second World War, they're not caring who's putting a roof over their head. So how do we work together in these very practical ways? And we made that commitment to work with each other. And my guess is that a lot of you are already working with your Roman Catholic neighbors now in hunger ministries, with our social ministry agencies working together. We'll need to do more of that. God knows this world needs a lot of help.
Yeah, this is for sure. Even in dialogue, I co-chair the Lutheran Catholic Dialogue, and even in dialogue, you see how far we have advanced and how far we have advanced in our relationships with each other. It's not uncommon that in dialogue, in the various dialogues that we have, as a Catholic, you might find yourself aligning more in many ways with your Lutheran counterpart than with some of your Catholic counterparts on certain issues and so on. And that kind of a flavor of the dialogue goes a long way. There's so much that we can do and that we are doing. That's why I think that it's important for all of us to share as much as possible all the things that we do together, because this encourages others to also move in ways that perhaps they had not thought of before. But there is a lot when you look at some, Catherine Johnson and I were working with a group down in Virginia not too long ago, a Lutheran parish and a Catholic parish, and these people love to be together. They gathered together one weekend, there's 700 altogether, and they sang hymns together. About 30% of the hymns in the Catholic hymnals are from the different Christian churches, not necessarily the Catholics. So we share those things. A good number of the 11 main Christmas hymns are also from all the different churches. So we do have a lot that we share together. And this is so encouraging and so enlightening for all of us.
Remember, I'm glad that you never came to one of our Lutheran churches back in the day when we'd have Reformation Sunday, because we were terrible. Mostly we're saying how we were not Roman Catholic. In my family, we're about half and half, and so my cousins they're Roman Catholic, and we go to their weddings, and my mother would say, "Don't kneel." And my Catholic cousins were afraid to come into our church because what would happen? We've moved so far beyond that, which is marvelous. And then at the time of the Second Vatican Council, I was a little bit younger than you, I think. But my neighbor asked me, "Are you Christian or are you Protestant?" And that was, hey, Lutherans, we were not so much different from that. So to come to this point where we can have honest conversations and see where we're united, but also those things we need to tackle is important. And I was asked after the presentation, we had a press conference at the Churchwide Assembly, how will people in the pew get to know this? This is just happening in this exalted atmosphere someplace. How will they know? Well, here, for the Lutherans, how many of you are members of ELCA parishes? Raise your hand. There you go.
Wow.
You go home to your parishes, you find, from conflict to communion, you find declaration on the way, and if you're not the pastor, you say to the pastor, "Pastor, I'll organize this for you. I'll do all the phone calls. I'll even get refreshments." We're big talking about the priesthood of all believers, but we really need you to get this message to brothers and sisters. And when you do that, I think you will find the longing is there, the yearning that we have for unity. So that's a homework assignment for you to be working on after October 32nd. So we'll make sure that happens. So what do you think the future is going to look like?
Oh, I think the future is filled with hope and with opportunity. I say that mainly because of our reliance on the grace of God, that it's in the air, and we have to, I think, take full advantage of the opportunity that we have before us. One thing that strikes me, the discordant notes and the lack of civility in the public discourse today. And you don't have to get involved in any political issue or any political party, but it's there. And there's a lack of respect, no reverence for what people hold as dear. And I think that when we look at it, we Catholics, we're pretty good at hurling stones at it. We're doing it for 450 years. I mean, so we know how to do those things. But yet, something happened. By the grace of God, things changed. And so I think that it's this declaration on the way, this working towards unity, it goes beyond a Lutheran Catholic coming together. It is something I feel that God has entrusted to us to share with society. And if we do this, I mean, we can model how it is to have differences, how it is to have a history that is not very, very wonderful in the ways that we treated each other. But if we can do this and come together more and more, we can have an influence, I think, on the public discourse. We will. And we will help things move in a very positive way. I believe these things are happening. It's often said when the student is ready, that the teacher will come. And I think that we have this yearning within us, we have this desire. And so I think that God will open the way for us to understand things that were happening years and years ago, we never could envision happening now. We never could envision this kind of a talk. I remember not too long ago, we had a meeting at the USCCB, the headquarters for the Catholic bishops in Washington here. And we had a prayer service there. And there it was right in USCCB headquarters. And they said, oh, who's going to preach? Well, ask Bishop Eaton if she'll preach at that. So, and there, it was wonderful. And it was just taking, oh, yeah, that's fine. That'll work well. So I think that we're really moving in a very good direction. And I think that we will find that our coming together will have an effect on society itself.
That is a hope and prayer, and that would be another very practical outcome of our dialogue. Rick Steves was with us, and is with us again today, and in the DVD that he made, he pointed out that the Reformation also gave birth to the 30 Years' War, where nearly 1/3 of the population of Germany was killed during that time. So Lutherans, we don't have, we sort of focus on the nailing or mailing the 95 Theses and the Great Reformer, but part of this dialogue and part of our ecumenical and interreligious dialogues has us as Lutherans confront our history. As Bill Horn says, we cannot tell a different history. We have to be aware of the things that we said or that Luther said and that were acted upon to great, great devastation. You'll hear a little bit more about this later on this morning, but Luther's anti-Judaic diatribes at the end of his life were hateful and were misappropriated by the Nazi regime. And that's something we can't deny. You can't just say that didn't happen. But now, being honest about that, we can tell our history differently. And I think that's critically important for all of us as we are now finding ourselves in a culture that really wants us to separate into our own separate echo chambers. I mean, you can pick your news outlet for how you want to feel about the world. I did that once. When the Second Gulf War, I thought, well, we're not doing very well, so I switched to another channel, and we were winning. It really does sort of work that way. But this dialogue now, and what you'll be hearing about later this morning and this afternoon, really brings up the point or the importance of people of faith, of religious communities, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, religious communities saying, we know that it's God's will that there should be peace, or if I may, shalom, or wholeness. And our vision in Revelation is that all nations, all languages, all countries will be streaming before the throne. So then we can have these difficult theological conversations, but we can also engage with our partners in our own church and also with ecumenical partners and say, racial injustice is still an issue in our church and in this country. Can the church be the one to talk about this together? Classism is still a reality in this country. Xenophobia is still something. Can we, most of us who either didn't come over in the Middle Passage or were already here as Native people, we came as immigrants. Same with your tradition. How can we stand together for immigrants now? That's the work we can all do together.
I think, again, it is so important for us to seize this time that is before us and to use it well. I was thinking that, last year at the a year ago today with the joint statement with Bishop Yunnan and Pope Francis, in the very beginning of the scripture quote, abide with me, abide in me. And if you really just, it's such a sweet, sweet, sweet saying for Jesus, abide with me. But how can you abide with him when we don't abide with each other? I mean, it rings hollow, and it lacks a certain sincerity. And I thought by that, just starting off with that quote, it struck me that, boy, this is a very important message. We have to abide with Christ, and we have to abide with each other. And that's another thing that brings us closer and closer together. It's the time. There's a time and a season for everything. And I think this is the time and the season for unity.
Well, thank you very much, Denis, for being here. This conversation that we've had, the conversation that will continue. And thanks to all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you very much.